Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Randy Bach. Today's August 25th, 2023, and I'm honored to have as a guest the excellent writer Daniel Jupp. Tell us, Daniel, what you've been thinking about, writing about, and working on.
Hi there. Well, I'm an English working class writer. I've been published in Politicalite and Spectator, and I'm a regular contributor to Country Squire magazine. What I mainly concentrate on, although I'm English, I spend a lot of time writing about US politics, and I've got a 30-year interest in the US. So I'm quite a strong Trump supporter. I'm one of those people around the world who identifies with the things he did and the things he says. So I've been most engaged probably in commentating on American stuff more than British stuff for the last few years, and there's been moments where the two things segue and intersect, particularly with obviously Brexit and Farage and his connections with Trump. So that's the sort of stuff I talk about mainly.
So we just had the Republican debate, and I'm wondering what your take was. There was the Tucker Carlson Donald Trump interview, and I think simultaneously, with some overlap, there was the Republican debate. What were your thoughts?
I watched both. I watched the Trump interview first of all, and although I'm a very strong Trump supporter, I'd say that articulating his thoughts isn't his greatest strength. The interview with Tucker that I was looking forward to didn't really show Trump at his best or Tucker at his best, was my feeling. It was subdued, a little bit tired, thoughtful, and it had some odder sides, like, talking about heat pumps for quite a while and stuff like that. So although all of it you could see some relevance, I don't think it got out the kind of important things that really needed to be said. And I think Trump was a little bit cautious in it as well, which is unusual for Trump. But he was obviously being careful about what he said, and that may be because of the legal situation he's in at the moment. So that, there wasn't sparks, as Trump had said there would be. There were a few interesting bits, but some of the most interesting bits were skirted, like the when he was questioned on Epstein and whether he thought that Epstein had been murdered, which is getting right into the heart of the stuff that's most controversial. And also when Tucker tried to ask him a couple of times whether he thought that his own life was in danger, and I think those are the kind of really vital things that an honest answer on would have been very, very interesting indeed. But Trump played it safe, I think, in that one. So there were some good bits. There was the bit on Kamala, which was fantastic, where Trump described how Kamala speaks and and got it spot on with a typically funny, witty Trump put down. And so I liked that bit, but the rest of the bit was fairly safe and fairly bland.
Yeah, I didn't get to watch it in its entirety, so I've probably watched 35% of it. I skipped around a little bit because I was not watching it live, streamed, and I agree about somewhat the subdued part. I think as far as his, worrying about his life being threatened, I think his taking credit for Soleimani, Baghdadi, and other aspects, and say, like, I don't know, somehow it's like, I don't know if the CIA did this, and then some other points he says we did that. I couldn't really discern who the we was if we weren't the CIA. I mean, I don't really know what that means. I mean, we are the defense. I'm the chief of staff.
Well, I assume he means the Trump administration by that, and and which is fair enough point. There's certainly other administrations, and the ones that would be opposed to him and dislike him were very forward in taking credit for example, when Osama bin Laden was killed. So, it's the same sort of thing there, I think.
Yeah, but it's kind of like this weird divorce. If the CIA had been involved in it, I mean, that would still be your administration. But I think thought he was making some kind of, apparent schism between him and the, deep state, as it were, how those are somewhat independent actors. I don't know if that was his point, but taking responsibility, and presumably Iran would want revenge. I think that would bespeak that he doesn't really consider or care whether his life is in danger. It's like, that seems to be going out. If he really were terrified or frightened, he would not be, taking credit for, those assassinations where, the real potential bad guys would want to.
I think the issue there is that, and I think this is where Tucker is coming from. It's not necessarily that it's foreign forces that would be, even ones like Iran, that would be the threat to Trump's life. It is that the CIA or US intelligence services of some kind would be the threat to Trump's life. And I think that's what Tucker was getting at. And, the question is really, will they go JFK on you next?
Yeah, so to that point, I mean, it's not spoken, so it's hard to, pinpoint it exactly, but like pinning a worm. But I actually worry more about, Rogue, kind of like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, look the other way kind of thing. Antifa was allowed to burn down cities, and they have not really been prosecuted. And I think there's kind of this permissive aspect, the way that the Republican congressman was shot, and not really that much happens about it. There's not much, if Nancy Pelosi's husband is assaulted, it's huge news nonstop, and Republicans are kind of fair game. I think Rand Paul has been assaulted a couple of times. Once right in D.C. After the Senate.
The Rand Paul's been attacked multiple times.
Yeah, and multiple times, and he was attacked by his neighbor, like brutally. I think he's had broken ribs and stuff like that. And you don't hear much about that. And so it seems to me that there's always this tendency that Republicans are fair game. They don't really. They're kind of like, we care about human beings, but the question is whether Republicans really qualify as human beings, and so whether they pass muster. But as far as kind of to segue or change subjects slightly about his amusing aspect. I mean, the other mildly amusing thing he did was he bequeathed Crooked Joe as a title, and he said it was really a lot of it took a lot of heavy lifting on Joe's part to wrest that away from Hillary. The Jeffrey Epstein stuff. He seemed to hedge a little bit on either side. I don't think he really wants to go there one way or another. I'm not sure he has much to gain per se. But, again, I didn't watch the entirety of it. But, yes, I think he was subdued. He looks older because he's older. And he's probably lost a little bit of weight, which is not a bad thing per se. But, his posture and whatnot, I think he was, trying to, I assume expand his audience and whatnot. I mean, that's really the thing with politics is you're solid supporters. You're solid supporters. You don't necessarily always need to feed them. It's the other ones, who might be your new audience. But I think there was some, reasonable vindication. Trump and Tucker felt about, Fox News not having Tucker and or Trump on that night. So there were, few mild points. I found it somewhat interesting, but I didn't stick around for the entire thing. But switching over, what did you? Well, you could talk about what he thought about that move in general on Donald Trump's part of abstaining and abjuring the debate for this purpose. Reasonable political move, or do you have any thoughts and comments about it? And then we can kind of head into the Republican primary cast of characters.
It was absolutely the right move, and the right move for the reasons that Trump outlined, really. When you're 40 points ahead, why would you lower yourself to contest with these people? He's the legitimate leader, and he's the person that is the choice still of the vast majority of Republican voters. And the whole process of a nomination in the circumstances that we face at the moment, in the circumstances that the US faces, it's a circus, really, and it's something of a farce that this nomination battle is going on. because you know, I've got plenty of friends who say, well, there has to be a process and we have to select the leader. And well, really, when you know the Democrats don't do that, the Democrats have lined up, you know, and
there's half of them committed like ritual etiquette at the mention of, you know, after the South Carolina primary. It's like there's a lot of primaries to go, and they're all like, yes, I'm dropping out.
Yeah, and dropping out for a very weak, you know, senile, corrupt, Chinese Communist Party owned,
yeah,
you
like
know, guy who is a liability. They're dropping out for
basically
a
a
guy
Muppet
who's a liability.
a Muppet with nobody's hand up running him.
Yeah, yeah. So they're all prepared, or you know, and presumably there were other people who could have taken, for example, Fetterman's place, you know, and the Democrats regularly will get people to step aside on party orders, or they'll do, you know, a fix like they did with Bernie Sanders. So that, you know, that's how they work, because they're ruthless and they'll do whatever they need to do or want to do. Whereas the Republican Party doesn't have that unity, and even facing what is effectively a banana republic situation now, and with a kind of lawfare that's gone beyond simple bias and into actual tyranny. Even facing that, these guys are not aware enough and not self-aware enough and not aware enough of what's going on to withdraw from the race. And I think, you know, that's a black mark against all of them, to be honest. So they're irrelevant for a start, because they're not going to overtake Trump. None of them is going to overtake Trump at any point. They're not going to get close, and they haven't done. You know, Ron DeSantis had the biggest chance. 2020, he was looking very, very strong. He had the Fox network behind him. He was being puffed up. He had the good record on COVID. So if anyone was going to be in a position to challenge Trump, it was DeSantis from that point.
I mean, and in the 2020 race, in the previous race,
I mean, from 2020, which is when the point at which Fox really obviously switched from a kind of mildly beneficial to Trump to being full on against
Trump.
Are
you saying he should have run? Are you saying DeSantis should have run against the incumbent Trump in 2020, or that he was?
No, not at all. I'm saying after 2020, you know, with the record on COVID, DeSantis was being built up.
Right. So his numbers as a shadow candidate would have been high when the race wasn't on, like 21, 22, and so forth.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, he was in a strong position then, and you can see why he started to get presidential ambitions, because around 22, from 20 to 22, he's probably in his strongest place. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the only person who looked like he could actually challenge Trump. But since he announced, and really a little bit before that, his campaign for the Republican nomination has been an absolute train wreck, a complete disaster. And he, you know, he's looked like he sold out and that he's owned by a donor class that simply don't want Trump. And it's been one of the worst run campaigns I've ever seen, I would say, the DeSantis campaign, because he's never really decided how to deal with Trump. You know, he's not been someone like Christie, who absolutely despises Trump and will attack him outright again and again and again. He's wanted to try and be Trump 2.0. Well, that means that you've got to try and get rid of Trump without offending Trump voters. And that's a very difficult thing to do. And he hasn't managed it. It's an impossible trick, and he's not been able to pull it off. So
well, I'm not sure I'm not sure it is an impossible trick. Maybe it's an impossible trick if you really want to become president in 2024 /5. But I mean, isn't Vivek kind of doing that? Isn't he better at being DeSantis than Ron is?
Well, I just think that if you look at the debate, DeSantis was almost unnoticeable there. He wasn't the big beast that the others were attacking in the absence of Trump. Vivek was.
Mm-hmm.
Ramaswamy was the one who was attacking several of the other candidates, and the one that they all looked to be trying to take down.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
Sure.
even amongst these other candidates, even amongst the field of the also-rans, all competing for second place by a distance, DeSantis is now irrelevant. He wasn't the strongest force there, and it all goes down to the fact that he tried to take out Trump without being honest about wanting to take out Trump, and voters have seen through that. And all the good he's done, he tried to lead off with the good he's done previously. These very first comments were about COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And, I gave him huge amounts of credit for that. Loads of people did.
Oh, absolutely. On a personal basis, I was down in Florida in 2020, and not only was the weather nice and so forth, but it was just such a huge breath of fresh air. I mean, literally. And to see, old people walking around without masks. And Florida is, the single oldest age demographic in the U.S. They call it what heaven's waiting room. And old people were, calm and walking around without masks, and they were not dropping dead. I'm sure they do at some rate in the nursing homes or whatever, because life passes. But it was just an alternate reality, and a much better one. And I have friends down there, and some who are, Ron DeSantis early supporters, back in the day when he's in Congress and whatnot. And, so I'm kind of like 1 or 2 degrees of separation away from him based on some of my friends and whatnot, and high praise. And I'm, hugely admiring. A lot of my, friends on Facebook and whatnot are big admirers, and I admire the guy too. But
and that's earned admiration. I'm not saying he doesn't have a good record. He has an excellent record, and in some ways, he looked better than Trump at strategy and at tactics. And some of the things he did, the stuff he did against Disney, the fact that he's fired Soros-linked people, working in Florida. He's got a very good record there, but it's become irrelevant because because he's been crushed so much, because he's been, he's so far behind Trump, and Trump's managed to do this in his usual fashion by, just a couple of throwaway lines about DeSantis, and DeSantis has been flattened, and he looks like Jeb Bush now, and he's not escaping that. So
it could be
when your big ticket, when your selling point is that you're the guy who can take on the swamp more effectively than Trump, you're smarter, you're more tactical, you're better, all of that gets wrecked if Trump then crushes you in a nomination battle, which is what's happened. So he can't really get over that contradiction of saying, I would be more effective, I would be more tactical, I would be better and cleverer, whilst he's been, beaten to a pulp easily.
Yeah, no, I get that. So what were your thoughts about various tactical moments within the debate? What were the things that stood out for you? And how did, everyone wants to hear the grades and whatnot, but leaving the grades aside, and let's look at the gray zones. What were the kind of shadings and the moments? What was the drama there for you?
I think I don't think anybody other than Vivek had a strong performance. And I think Ramaswamy was the one who had more of a clear idea of where the base are at than any of the others. And the others were kind of appealing to Fox and trying to appeal to the things that the Republican Party may have been, about 20 years ago. That's what they're doing. You know, a lot of them were saying, you know, the spending is outrageous. We're going to stop the spending. You know, we are for low taxes. Well, I'm for low taxes. You know, most people on the right are for low taxes. But that doesn't sound honest, and it doesn't sound relevant when all of these people, when they've had the chance or when they've had the opportunity to stop huge amounts of spending going to Ukraine, have supported it. You know, and Vivek was the one who realised that where the base is at and what the base is feeling. And the base doesn't want to hear criticism of Trump. You know, they think it makes them sound independent and respectable. And it probably does if you're a Democrat voter. But if you're a Republican voter, it makes you sound owned and disloyal. You know, and that's what they're selling all the time, the ones who attack Trump. So that doesn't fly. The other thing that they try and sell on it is kind of wrapping yourself in patriotism and the flag. And Republican voters are patriotic. You know, I'm a patriot for England, and I love America as well. But when someone wraps themselves in the flag to support a war that is costing the US huge amounts of money and influence, that's a disaster. The proxy war has been more damaging for the US than it has for Russia. You know, the trying to use Ukraine to get rid of Putin has been a disaster for America. You just have to look at what's happened with the petrodollar. You've got to look at the way, as you know, as Ramaswamy said, Russia has been pushed into the arms of China by the Western attitude towards Ukraine. And beforehand, you know, the globalists in the Western world thought that they could use Ukraine to take down Putin, and they've been meddling in Ukraine since 2014 or earlier. The CIA installed a regime that they preferred to the regime that beforehand. Mm-hmm. The Ukrainians aren't kind of covered in glory and the kind of people you'd want to defend their freedom that necessarily anyway, because they've got things like the Azov Brigade, who are neo-Nazis. So the whole thing has looked morally suspect for a long time. And frankly, in the conditions that America is in, when you've got tyranny at home and when you've got open borders at home, you don't want to hear people saying, we care about the borders of Ukraine more than we care about the borders of the USA. They want someone to fix the Southern American border. They don't want someone to go and defend the sovereignty of Ukraine.
No, not just that, but the rule of order in our cities. I mean, I was out in Los Angeles recently, and you know, I'd seen many photographs and these little kind of streaming videos of, you know, underpasses and these tent villages and whatnot that go on and on and on. You know, there's a mess out there. It's like there's a whole, you know, male kind of disappointed, disgruntled, given up, like, you know, slightly older than middle age class of guys just hanging out, waiting for their string to end. There's a sadness. You know, one of my things in medicine was narcotic de-addiction, and I don't want to go down this road too long, but in the 2000s, I began doing a tapering narcotic detox using the modality of Suboxone. I went to sobriety. A lot of people use it for maintenance. I wanted to get people clean. So I saw a lot of that. And, you know, I actually have a book in galleys on the opioid epidemic, basically how to, more about how, on a personal basis, how to withdraw from narcotics and get away from narcotics, not as opposed to maintenance. So it's called Withdraw to Freedom. And part of the research for the book is I was looking at the opioid epidemic, and it kind of went up at various times when the government has been involved, you know, in producing methadone and as a maintenance concept, and later as Suboxone. But it was very quietly, you know, ignored during the Trump administration. He never brought it up as a topic of concern for the administration. There was never the war on drugs. It wasn't a loud, bruited topic. But in point of fact, the opioid numbers went down during Trump. And this without any tension, without having a Nancy Reagan like war on drugs figure in the White House and so forth.
And that's because of the border.
Well, it was part of it is the border, and part of it was giving men in the methamphetamine middle class a reason to live. I mean, the men and women are different, and men will self-abuse far more than women with drugs and alcohol. Women tend to go to therapists, and men tend to go to their drug dealer, their bartender, or their computer and themselves. They're much more solitary, and they get into deeper depressions. And when they kill themselves or commit attempt suicide, they're good at it. The rate of women, men and women attempting suicide is a very different thing, and obviously the end result can be the death. But women attempt suicide and they're only successful at a very, very low rate, because it's not necessarily I don't want to get too far down this, but a lot of times it's just a cry for help. With men, I'm doing this. We're done. And this, anyway, getting back to these cities of basically quasi homeless. There's campers and tents and whatnot, but essentially homeless guys, camped out and whatnot. There's a whole, kind of lifelessness and namelessness, formlessness that's going on. That was the opposite during the Trump administration. The people who voted for him in Michigan and the vast swaths of the upper Midwest, they apparently knew what they were doing, and they got the right answer. There was more jobs, more industrial jobs, and there was a caring about who you were. And this is, I think, the essence of manhood. And I mean, we can concern ourselves with womanhood as well, but men do, more different kind of violent things when they are dissatisfied. And it's not to say they should be satisfied first, but it is a interesting phenomenon that this kind of class that gets ignored, it's the flyover class, is suffering once again. And they're drugging themselves, and they're just hanging out and so forth. It's not just the border crossers; it's a lot of Americans who just can't mix in. And so we have a safetyist agenda. Now we're worried about COVID-23 or whatever it is. They don't call it that. There's just all these other things that we have to worry about. We have to worry about certain toilets, or getting rid of incandescent light bulbs, or whatever the next phase of everything is. Electric cars, getting rid of making a 15-minute cities they have in the UK. All these things that are like elitist, kind of like checklists, and everybody, frankly, I think your working class by history and whatnot are being ignored, and it's a sadness. And it gets at the essence of democracy, which I think for the Democrats, oddly and inimically enough with their actual name, Democrats, is not. They're really not into the demos, into the people themselves.
Oh, absolutely, and MAGA is a working class movement led by a billionaire. And one of the great crimes for the elite that Donald Trump committed was betray his class. He's got the instincts, the feelings, the mannerisms, the tastes of the working class. That's why they hate him so much. One of the reasons. He also, he also threatens their income streams and their power and their privilege, and they won't tolerate that. Because a lot of their power and privilege is based on corruption and based on selling out their nation, and based on doing things that reward them in the short term financially, but which wreck their country. Trump was a threat to all of that, which is why he had to be removed. Particularly, you look at something like the level of corruption involved in the business dealings of the Biden family. Well, that's not something that has emerged in isolation. Every senator, earns 10 times what they officially earn from either party. A lot of it is based on, Pelosi-style insider trading, or
well, it's not just that. It's kind of the book deal. The best kind of graft, from my understanding, is the book deal. I mentioned this on one of my other interviews recently. As soon as Hillary Clinton got into the U.S. Senate from New York, I don't know how many years ago that was, maybe 15, years ago, more. She got like a $5 million book deal. Nobody's going to read her book. Nobody wants to read her book. Nobody did read her book. And this goes on. It's the same thing as the Hunter Biden $300,000 painting.
Yeah.
Nobody wants the painting. So, what they're doing is not insider trading. I mean, I'm sure that happens. She had the commodity deals and she never lost any money. She had, 100 to 1 returns and whatnot, and 10 to 1, where other people were losing money at the same time. Anyway, so there is some of that, no doubt. But I think
influence buying.
A lot of the stuff is way above board in all manner and respect, and you can't really dissect it out because it's people buying books en masse, so they're not reading them. I mean, I don't know if they recycle them, put them into the coal factories and run their electric cars off the burnt books, but most of his stuff is graphed right out in front of you. And some of it gets dissected, like Hunter Biden's Burisma payments, but they still haven't, obviously gone after this. So you have this huge leash. The Clinton Global Foundation, was a huge graft manipulation.
Oh, the Haiti money that they took.
Yes.
That was just daylight robbery. And it happens again and again, and it's what these foundations and institutions that they set up are for, for graft and for theft.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing thing. So let's get back to some of the particulars. I don't know if you really want to dissect some of the other moments. I thought it was an interesting moment for me when Nikki Haley, they brought up abortion, and Nikki Haley says she is against abortion because her husband is adopted and she had trouble having kids. Did you hear that?
Yeah, that seemed slightly odd reasoning to me, but it's this old politician's trick which doesn't work so much anymore, which is trying to humanize their story, and and take it's a little bit like Biden dragging out his dead son all the time, isn't it? And that's
yeah. He's metaphorically dragging him out.
Yeah, it's kind of there comes a point where the first time someone mentions something like that, it's tragic, and the 300th time they mention it, it's obscene. This is how it goes, and it's kind of you're exploiting a tragedy, and and it reminds me of, there was a famous moment where, in an impromptu moment, Tony Blair once came outside and he kind of gave a talk to some journalists, and it was all supposed to be fairly impromptu. And he came out with a coffee cup that was printed with the pictures of his children, and you just think, was that really the one that was sitting there and the one that he was drinking from, all these kind of manufactured moments of humanity and references to, yes, I'm a normal person, I have a family, it's incredibly fake, but they all do it. But I mean, Nikki Haley was an interesting one, because I think a lot of people will have come away from that debate thinking that she did well and she put in a strong performance.
Oh,
but
really?
Yeah, I think a lot of people will say that, and I've seen some people saying that. Personally, because I'm so wonderful at seeing through all this stuff, personally, I thought she was terrible.
I agree with you. That's probably because I'm also hugely insightful.
Yeah, that must be it. It's the character trait we share.
Yeah. Plus, I noticed it in you, and you seem to notice it in me. That makes us doubly insightful.
I know. I feel it's exponentially growing every time we talk.
Yeah, but, I know. I'm not sure any of our listeners are agreeing, though, so we're going to have to move
but
on.
The thing about she also delivered what I think is was the worst line of the whole debate, which when she said Trump is the most hated man in America, and the instant reaction of someone like me, or like someone who's looking at the other candidates, maybe likes Trump but might consider one of the others, that's an instant I'm not going to consider that person, because your first thought on hearing that is, most hated to who, Nikki?
Right.
Most hated to Democrats,
right.
Most hated to the media, but not most hated to Republican voters who you're trying to appeal to.
It's an amazing thing. I don't understand that. I'm gonna personalize things. Taking your political advice here. So I have God bless her. I have an elderly aunt. She's the last of that generation for us, kind of the upper tier of the grand parent kind of crowd for our kids, the grand aunt and whatnot on either side. Well, maybe not quite. Anyway, and she says a lot of things that align with what Donald Trump wants and whatnot. But when you bring him up, she's like, oh my God, he's so horrible. He did this and this and this. I said, well, no, actually, he didn't do that, that, and that.
Yeah.
So she and my mother had an internecine battle for decades, and I actually brought them together when both their husbands had passed. My dad and my uncle, and God bless them. But and so they lived the last decade of my mother's life, together, and they were chatting endlessly on the phone. So I said to her, I said, there was a time when you couldn't speak with my mom. You had very deep, dark, bad thoughts about her and vice versa. And then you had this reality that's totally different. Each of you were encamped, and you had, whatever, a faction. They were arguing about money and control and stuff like that. I don't want to get into it, but what you're getting with Donald Trump, and what most people are, is the worst things that people could say because they want to take somebody down. And then you take those things whole cloth without examination, which is unfortunately what many, many people do. And I'm not in love with Donald Trump. He's, I don't have a photograph of him over my bed, but I admire his bravery. And I think that, you can argue policies and whatnot, and things go on. And the president doesn't get everything he wants anyway. And then it comes down to like who's able to fight and get there. I was, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but I pushed really hard for Mitt Romney a number of times. I live in Massachusetts, and I met him over and over again at these fundraisers and whatnot. And I was pretty gung ho for him in 2008, and then in 2012. And I had real high aspirations for him, but there was no President Romney. He folded at the most crucial moment when Candy Crowley, challenged him. I mean, you can't deal with Candy Crowley. I mean, just the name alone, I don't know. And he was correct. He couldn't stand by his own facts. He didn't have enough confidence in his own facts to be contradicted by Candy Crowley. And I forget what it was about. I think it was about Henry. And despite seeing his quisling characteristics, I still think he would have been better than Obama term 2, because I think that was the United States breaking point for the infiltration and whatnot, or the change in the military getting a lot of doctrine. Anyway, I think it was the change over the FBI and a lot of our institutions to having to follow and understanding that there wasn't going to be any rescue, that you didn't have kind of, if you would be punished for, say, old term patriotic views, that you were being seen as the new style, whatever the worst epithets are,
domestic terrorist.
Yeah, MAGA terrorist, white supremacist, this and that, super Nazi, and so forth. And they trot those terms out endlessly. Everybody I'm sure you've seen the cartoon book, the kids' book. Everybody I don't like is a Nazi. Have you seen that?
Mm. Yeah, it's constant, and it's utterly absurd. And the tragic thing, in a way, is that there are genuine extremists, and most of them are on the left, and most of them are the actual number of people out there who are, for example, I'm an admirer, who would go around saying that they are admirers of Hitler and mean it. It is tiny, absolutely tiny. And I've encountered in discussions online, etc. I've encountered right-wing people who, for example, detest Jews, and it's hideous and it's there, but it's tiny. It's absolutely tiny. Yeah. And then when you compare that to the number of people on the left who think that they're rational, think that they're reasonable, think that they're fairly centrist, and that theirs is the way of hope, peace, and equality, and they are prepared to have people imprisoned without charge, imprisoned for lengthy periods for trespass. They're prepared to have people murdered by the Capitol Police when they're unarmed women. and to support that and to think it's normal, think it's part of defending democracy.
No, and the thing is, they did all that stuff
It's
themselves.
astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, they attacked the Supreme Court at one juncture. They were hanging out at all the Supreme Court the conservative justices' homes, all enabled. They overtook the Wisconsin, state house when Scott Walker was there, and they camped out for days there. I mean, I don't know if those things not insurrection. Stacey Abrams, complained about the vote being her gubernatorial election in Georgia having been stolen. She never stopped. Hillary never stopped about her election was being stolen. Al Gore never stopped about his election being stolen. I mean, everybody does all this, and it's only prosecutable or inflammatory from one half of the populace. And going back, I mean, there's loads of close elections. There have been loads of close elections in the U.S. I can't name them all. I think one was in Washington State, same kind of thing. The Republican was nose ahead, and then I think Patty Murray, whatever name, somehow, they've uncovered some ballots that hadn't been found, and these were things, they were the kind of the prodrome, early warning system decades ago. I think it was like, probably at this point, maybe 18 years ago, and I think Norm Coleman lost in Minnesota, same kind of thing. Harris, to Al Franken by, these late votes that showed up. Every close election only goes one way. That's why the George Bush thing in 2000 was so incredible. Because for some, I people, all my friends, I mean, I live in a liberalish place, or ones who aren't really liberals or leftists. And they just couldn't believe it that Bush won. How could it possibly be? Well, I said at the very least, it was a coin toss, correct?
Yeah.
And you don't get one side of the coin over and over again. I mean, every now and then tails wins, right? In this case, anyway, I think, and even the New York Times, when they did their simulations, they did 51 different simulations based on, various things they posited and so forth. And Bush won in like 42, I don't know, some predominant 80% of those simulations they did. That doesn't mean anything per se, but that's not convincing either. And it's just kind of anyway. So leaving all that.
This is. I mean, it's another way of showing the sort of blatantly obvious. If you can't see the double standards here, you're incapable of reason. If you can't see those double standards, because Naomi Wolf had an excellent article the other day where she said, I was on Gore's campaign team. We did everything pretty much that the Trump campaign did. To question an electoral result.
Opposite.
And
God bless you. That's what you should be doing.
Yeah. And nobody has said that Stacey Abrams should be in prison for questioning an election she lost. Nobody is saying that Hillary Clinton should be in prison for questioning an election she lost. Nobody is saying that Gore should be in prison for questioning an election he lost, right? But somehow it's legitimate to put Trump in prison for questioning an election that was obviously rigged. And obviously rigged to anyone with an ounce of intelligence.
At the very least, and the incontrovertible part was these 41 intelligence. I use the term loosely. Intelligence officers, signing off.
Wasn't it?
What?
51. Wasn't it?
Thank you. Yeah. Intelligence officials signing off that the Hunter Biden laptop was likely Russian disinformation, whatever.
Yeah.
That is as, I mean, I don't know. It's always Russians. Like they never had a problem with the Russians when they were Soviet.
Yeah.
As soon as they turned not Soviet, not communists anymore, it's all about Russia. It's been
maybe it's thing. Like that's a really interesting point, and maybe it's like I've spoken about this in an aside before, but if you think about it. Russia did to them what Trump did. Russia was on their side. Russia was Soviet, and then Russia gave up on being Soviet and left the leftist cause.
I don't understand the enamorment, if that's a word, with communism. It's just it's a crazy thing. And I have a close relative who's ostensibly a journalist. He went to journalism school and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, he told me at one point, It's a long story, but basically, I asked him why he wasn't covering a certain news item. He worked for a news organization. He was actually, looking for a topic and to write a book and whatnot. And he had a lot of Columbia connections, and nobody had written about Obama's time at Columbia. This was 2007, and I said, "You have a great book here." He says, "I would never ever write that book." I'm like, "Why wouldn't you?" It's like you have so many connections. You have hundreds of Columbia connections. They overlap with Obama's time there. You could find out what he was like. He says, "Well, there's a possibility that we might find out things, that are not good, and he's going well now. Why would I want to upset his boat?" I said, "Well, I don't know. See, you're a journalist. You should be looking for, He says, "You don't understand the first thing about what journalism is." I said, "Well, please enlighten me." And he called me a few names first. And then he said, "Well, journalism is about pushing the narrative." I'm like, "What narrative?" Left, right, basically progressivism. And that's our job. Our job is to convince people to move towards leftism. And that's kind of a hard thing to disprove in a sense. I think the media is probably a misnomer. It's not really the media. My term of art has always been the leftia. I would have called them the Sinistria, but I think people, would see obviously. Anyway, there's kind of this narrative pushing all the time, and I don't know where I'm going with this one, but
I think they're more like the coprophilia at the moment, but
right.
I mean, the media are beyond redemption at this point. The ones who have any integrity, any objective standards whatsoever, are the ones who are being attacked, who were formerly of the old left. People like Matt Taibbi and Naomi Wolf. They've both been excellent. Because there are these holdouts, these classical liberals, who actually did believe.
No, I know, that's a funny thing. I mean, that's kind of where I grew up. My dad was a Democrat, and everybody around us were Democrats. We were in New York City, and they had gradations of Democrats. So, he was against the leftists, as it were, and he wanted things to work. So there was, in New York City, we had the, John Lindsay, the rare Republican, but I didn't know or understand Republicans at all, growing up. But I think that, I do think there are, people who just want things to work, and, they want some rules, and they think the Democrats are better at that. And I kind of have the sense that the Republicans were a country club and elitist and whatnot. And of course, that's all kind of been flipped on its head. It seems that, it's a weird phenomenon. Do you have that in England as well? That
oh, absolutely. There's a great comment on this from Johnny Rotten, the
yes,
Sex Pistols guy, and he said he never imagined that the right would become the cool, rebellious, free speech, free rights.
Yeah, isn't it wild, huh?
And the left would become the censorious, nitpicking, bigoted, schoolmarmish people telling everybody what to do. And this is what's happened. The two things have flipped. And it's also flipped in terms of, who is for big business and who is for the little guy. That's completely flipped round from right and left now. And if you look at I saw an interesting chart the other day, which was the places that are the richest areas in the US, and the richest areas and the kind of inner city slums. That's where the Democrats have their votes. So the very, very richest places. And nearly all of the very rich places are Democrats.
I saw this labeled like 20 years ago, and I have not been able to find it, even with the internet. Somebody came up with the hamburger theory, and the hamburger's got two buns, and there's the meat in the middle. And his theory was that the Democrats are the buns; they're kind of lighter, fluffier, and then the top and the bottom of class society.
Yeah,
and the meat. The working functional part of your hamburger it turns out to be the Republicans, and it's a weird thing.
It's true in the UK as well, because in the UK, you look at the areas that voted for Brexit, which is considered very right wing. It's considered an extremist right wing idea that the British people should govern themselves rather than be governed by Belgians. You know, that's how absurd our times are. That's an extremist idea, apparently. But you know, the working class areas were all, whether they were Labour voters traditionally or Conservative voters traditionally, all the working class areas were for Brexit, and all the apart from inner London, where you've got some, you know, where there's no English people basically. But all the kind of rich areas, the university towns, the highly educated places, the places where people have lots of money, all of those were for the EU and for Remain.
Right. Well, it's a funny thing. I mean, I read recently that London is minority English.
Yeah, it's we're now at the point where 36% describe themselves as white British in London, which, you know, it's not. London is a foreign country for someone like me.
Yeah. Yeah. There was this little video of Trump, a whole motorcade or whatever, with police and whatnot, leaving Fulton County. I was thinking Folsom County because Johnny Cash sang from Fulton.
Yeah. They need to use that. He should do a Johnny Cash song.
If you want to write on us, we should make a song of that pretty quick, because somebody else will. But there were people lining the streets, and you know, it's Twitter. It's hard to tell whether it's representative, but it's a black neighborhood. It's Atlanta, and this was a poor black neighborhood. And people were, you know, lining up, and you figure they're going to be yelling something, but it was all like "Free Trump, free Trump, free."
Yeah.
And it didn't seem organized. It was not an organized thing.
They've done a fantastic job of making him the Republican that the black vote can love. They've done
he did a good job of that himself. Like
he's done a good job of that himself. But and I don't think they seem to. It's funny because they're very efficient at infiltrating everything and taking control of everything. But they have got no instincts whatsoever as to how ordinary people will respond to things, and it's kind of almost like Wile E. Coyote at the moment. That their attempts to get Trump, and it's like, you know, and Trump's the kind of road runner. So yeah, sure, you can book him, you can arrest him, you might even be able to put him inside, but you're just building his legend. All the time you're doing this, and they don't seem to realize that for a lot of Americans now, you know, certainly for Americans who feel that the system is rigged against them, you rig the system against Trump, and that makes him sympathetic to them.
Yeah, no, it's hilarious. I mean, I have had on a professor from Venezuela, and we were talking about Latin America, and Maduro is you know, blocking his opponent from running.
Yeah.
And in Brazil, you know, Bolsonaro just got, I don't know what the word, convicted or whatever, of, you know, he got reprimanded with no ability to run until 2030. In Ecuador, the candidate on the right, I mean, it was a pretty wide primary. I don't know if it was presumptive, whatever, but there's a President Lasso, not Ted, was you know, stepping down. He's on the right, I guess, center right, and the center right or right candidate got assassinated. And then in Argentina, you know, somehow the next, I mean, just the guy won the primaries on the right as well. So, but there's a lot of we were talking about the, you know, election integrity, and you know, we always used to send Jimmy Carter or somebody down there to do election integrity from some other country. It's like, I think we, you know, need, like, you know, to have if there are any Castros left in Cuba, and Maduro to come and do election integrity for us. I mean, it's just,
absolutely. And the thing is now, it's so blatant because, and they have to do it. If you look at the approval ratings of globalist leaders throughout the Western world, you know, they are hated by large sections of the populace. In every, you know, you look for Trudeau, you look for Macron. You know, Macron's had nothing but riots his entire term, and these people aren't liked. They aren't successful. So how do they win elections? They win elections by rigging them. How do they silence the level of hatred of them? They become more and more authoritarian, and they start closing down free speech, and they start shutting off communication networks, and they start imprisoning dissidents and rivals. And they all have to go that route because globalist policies aren't popular with the majority anywhere.
So I'm going to, unless you want to go back at all to the Republican debate candidates, but sounds like not. I'd like to hear your kind of predictions and thoughts for how things are going to play out in the election here and or elsewhere.
Okay, well, I mean, I do have to make a final mention of the candidates, and just say that for me the most loathsome moment of the debate was when not one of them could be honest enough to stand there and say that Mike Pence had ushered in tyranny, and that Mike Pence.
I remember that.
You know, and the fact, and you could see Mike Pence puff himself up because I think there's so much vanity in that man, far more than there is in Trump, actually.
Yeah.
But it's that pious vanity that conceals itself under sanctimony. And, you know, and he was waiting there for the accolades, and they came. And someone should have been honest enough to say,
yeah, somebody should have said it's begging the question. You know, I'm sure they couldn't physically watch the simultaneous Tucker Carlson Trump interview, but he brought up this point that, you know, as soon as Kamala, you know, was president of the Senate, that they passed a law, you know, making sure that Pence wouldn't have been able to do what he probably seemed like he could have done. And it wasn't overturning the election per se. It was a matter of verifying the electors from certain states that would not have passed muster, I guess. I'm not going to, you know, pretend to be able to dissect the legalities of that, and I didn't do it at the time either. But there's an argument to be made.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the Constitution does say that the state legislators have the final say, as far as I'm aware. And so returning it to them in the event of fraud would seem something that was constitutional. And, you know, as you've just said, and as Trump said, why would they change the law if it was genuinely illegal beforehand?
Right.
You know, you don't need to change that law. If the Constitution is clear on that, and if Trump was totally
I thought
wrong,
that it was kind of sad that there are a lot of lawyers on that stage. I'm pretty sure Christie and you know, Ramaswamy and DeSantis, I think he's got a law degree. There are a lot of people who should know better and who should say, I think we have had a lot of, you know, taking things at face value, and we need to research this. Everyone else, you know, when Pence said this was, you know, the worst pandemic we've ever had, the worst, you know, I think there should have been pushback on that. You know, there's a lot of things that people just, you know, it's petitio principi, that people just, you know, take the you know, the stipulated point and they just, you know, swallow it whole. They should, you know, instead of begging the question, they should be reversing the question and flipping it and investigating the question. I think that happens far too rarely. And that was a little bit of a sadness because, you know, nobody brought up that same point. I mean, I know none of them have the last name Trump. They wouldn't have had it in their interest to do so. But I think there were a lot of open points there that they should have known better. And they should have been, at this point, schooled.
I think it's and it's beyond Trump. It's, you know, Vivek did it to an extent and was the only one who did it to an extent. You know, like I noticed when he said, you know, get rid of the FBI, for instance. And, you know, there were a couple of kind of stronger points from Vivek. But
what do you think about getting rid of the FBI?
Is, like, by being there, they are endorsing and condoning the theft of 2020. By running against Trump in the circumstances we face now, they're helping the Democrat tyranny that exists now.
I don't know.
And by not withdrawing and by not saying we will put our support behind this candidate, they're wasting time that needs to be spent if you're serious about opposing this tyranny and making sure it doesn't affect other people outside the Trump administration. If you're
Well,
serious about defending America as a republic, what they need to be doing is fighting the fraud and making sure that the prosecutors can never behave in such a
yeah.
biased and disgusting manner again.
And it's also kind of
they're
sad
not
that,
doing it.
yeah, Fox, I don't think, I mean, I didn't get to watch the entire debate. I watched 70% of it. I haven't seen the end yet, but, Jenna Ellis was perp walked, and she was, put in jail
Yeah,
for being Trump's lawyer. I mean,
yeah.
in Georgia. I mean, that's, I don't know. I mean, I like bananas. I hate to call it Banana Republic, but that's
But
what
it
that
is.
is.
But it is entirely. And, there should have been, it's sad that there wasn't one other candidate who's prepared to call that out fully. Ramaswamy is distinguishing himself by being the one who will skirt closest to the truth. But even he's playing within the red lines determined by the other side and by the mainstream media of what's acceptable to say. And it's cowardice. Ultimately, it's moral and
What would you have had them
intellectual cowardice.
say that? What would you have had any of them say? What would you're running for U.S. president? You're up on the stage. What would you have said?
I would have said that America is already in a banana republic situation. That
Well, he did say that. He said we're in dark times.
Yeah. And I would have said that 2020 was stolen. And I would have said that until the mainstream media and everyone else there acknowledges that, they are liars and they are fraudsters and they are supporting tyranny. Because if you have a stolen election and then that's never questioned, and then you get to the point where people who do question it are threatened with prison for doing so, those are all the characteristics of tyranny.
I mean, yeah, you don't really need
and
much else.
They need to say that out, honestly.
You don't need much else from that.
No.
You see what's happening in Brazil. That's a very questionable election. The numbers, basically, this is all the people who want to get rid of the electoral college. They should go look at Brazil, because it's worse. You get rid of the electoral college, you basically can have one part where there's fewer, scrutiny. Brazil's my topic of late, somewhat, from my Zika book, and so I have an affinity for Brazil. I've had some interest in it. The poorer north goes lefter than the wealthier south, and there's also kind of a color gradation. The south is a little bit, more European, not exclusively, but anyway. So the number of percentages they got from the vote, the turnout was much higher in the north, and the pluralities were much, the differences were much higher for Lula in the north than they were for Bolsonaro in the south. If they had an electoral college system, and they have states there, state by state by state, I think Bolsonaro would have won, but they don't. And you also, weren't
the areas that voted that made the difference, not quite as tellingly as US swing states, but the areas that went against Bolsonaro are the areas that are known for endemic political corruption there.
Yes, and that's to my point, that the electoral college acts as a firewall, essentially. I mean, if you have a big warehouse building, and I lived in one at one point, like an old factory, and there were literal, my friends, not mine, but my friends lived in these converted factories, and they literally were firewalls. They're big iron doors that swing shut to keep the fire from going from one place to another, brick and whatnot. And so you get to isolate the problems. And so if you have a corrupted state, well, that's a sadness. But when that state, corruption gets to bleed over everywhere else, then you have a tragedy. And so that's what we see there. But anyway, I don't know how it all works out here, because there are a fair number of our states that seem to go one way, and I'm not sure how you can come back. When you have a Democrat-controlled state, they just seem to ignore all the basics of one man, one vote. They're not looking for, all basically you can divide up of the states that want to have voter ID and the ones that don't. And so if you don't want to have voter ID, that means to me that you are tacitly supporting anybody, corruption and whatnot. And I just want to put my own kind of spin on the electoral fraud. And an example I have, for better or for worse, is medical. There's kidney disease. We actually divide them up into 3 types. There's pre-renal, renal, and post-renal. So the 3 types of kidney disease, one happens right before the kidney, one happens within the kidney, and the other one happens in the, the excretory, like your urinary tract. So you have kidney stones, that's post-renal. I'm not going to get into everything about those things, but just the way I kind of divide the election is pre-election, election, and post-election. I think there are 3 different areas of problems there. And the pre-election is not election day per se, but the vote harvesting, the overkill of the COVID-19 thing, keeping people implicitly, under this thought that they're going to need massive mail-in ballots when absentee ballots already existed. There was no reason for mail-in ballots. That is in a sense of fraud, was misapplying the COVID situation and aggrandizing it and turning it into a situation where you basically overturn the election pre-renal. So that's a pre. And so you create, a moral hazard, so leaving, a pack of money, in the middle of the street. If you wind up with, people fighting and having a riot, and do you have a responsibility? Yes, in a sense you do. They're doing the fighting, but you left the money in the street. So they have all these mail-in ballots there, and implicitly, if not explicitly, it was there for ballot harvesting. And then you have the, Facebook, Zuckerberg, putting, I forget exactly how many, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars towards this vote harvesting aspect, and basically
something like around it was around like $350 to $400 million.
Right, and so so everyone is all supposed to go nuts when supposedly Russia put a tenth of that in, or a 100th of that into Facebook for ads, but we're not supposed to go nuts when Facebook itself puts some fraction of $1 billion
and used it to pay, gave it directly to Democrat cities, who then gave it directly to people, including judges.
Right,
got this money.
It's a vote harvesting scheme. And then I've seen, I forget, it was 2,000 Mules. What's the name of the movie? Dinesh D'Souza's movie. And so basically created a vote harvesting. So a lot of these votes are technically legal votes, but they were not obtained legally. They weren't obtained in the sense, they basically, they toured the nursing homes and universities, whatever, and they got people wouldn't ordinarily vote. So they got kind of the, when Fidel Castro got elected, he used to get 99% or something like that, and that's what Chavez got. And so they got these factitious numbers of votes, and there you go. So that's the pre-renal portion. So it was a lot of it was baked in the cake. But I do think there was election day fraud, because I don't think they understood how well Trump was going to do. And since we do have the Electoral College, he was going to do well in certain places. And then they had to do the renal part, the actual election day stuff, and card in places and black out the places and have these election polling places go to sleep, as it were, with vans showing up in Fulton County and all this kind of stuff. It's a lot of stuff going on that was nuts. And then
that's why the Biden final count is so ridiculous. That's why it's 81 million votes, because Trump got 74 million votes, and because they were in a last-minute panic to top that. Trump did a lot better than they expected.
And there were certain places they thought they could win, they didn't. So that kind of like
so they had to manufacture a ridiculous number of votes, an unbelievable number of votes to anyone rational. The idea that this is the thing that gets me now, because we've gone so far along. There's still people on the right and Republicans who will go along the mainstream narrative and say that was an honest election, or say that there might have been some, like Bill Barr style, there might have been some fraud, but it wasn't enough to affect the result. Instantly announcing that is itself incredibly crooked. And that's why Bill Barr is, along with all of it, because he's a crook.
I don't understand. I liked Bill Barr. I thought he was a solid citizen. He went to my high school for that, what that's worth. And his dad is an interesting writer. I think he's a bright guy, and I don't know. I just don't get it. But, you're talking to a guy who liked Mitt Romney. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I must have my lapses here. But
if you like the Chinese as well, I'm really going to start to suspect you.
Well, I liked Donald Rumsfeld. Dick Cheney I thought was always kind of a kind of grumbly, odd character. I do think that between him and Bush, he was the brighter of the two.
Yeah. But between Bush and an actual Bush, the Bush would be the brighter of the two.
So we have two bushes in front of our house, left and right. We've got these big wide. I don't know what they're called. They're kind of evergreen, but they're wide bushes. We actually call them George and Laura.
Yeah. I would let them die.
Well,
that's just me. But
I can't do that. So I'm going to show people your book and efforts. Let's see if I can pull them up here. Oh, here we go. So here's your upcoming book. I'm going to put up for the populace to see.
Yeah.
Can you tell us?
Well, as you can see from the title, that's Gates of Hell. Why Bill Gates is the most dangerous man in the world, and it's obviously it covers COVID to an extent. It covers the influence he's had on global health policies.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fair chunk in there about India and the things like the polio vaccines, But what I've tried to do is I've tried to be more balanced than I necessarily feel, but because everything you can find on Bill Gates, it's one extreme or the other, pretty much. All the mainstream media, all the kind of left-wing sources will be telling you that this man's a hero and a philanthropist and someone who has helped eliminate diseases, and they will be completely on that he is an angel. And then, of course, there's the things that gets labelled conspiracy theories, which will be describing him as a demonic figure. And I've kind of drawn from both as and when I needed to. But my point is not so much that I'm not saying that he deliberately wants a depopulation agenda or that he's deliberately supported policies that kill people. My argument is that the policies do kill people and the policies are dangerous, and the gathering of power to one man to the extent that has occurred with Bill Gates is itself anti-democratic and dangerous, regardless of whether or not you believe the kind of wilder ideas about him. So, his danger is that based on his personality and the way he operates and the level of power he's acquired, the power and influence he's acquired, which shouldn't accrue to any one unelected person to that extent.
Well, I mean, that's going to happen so let's give him credit. He's not the inventor of anything per se, but I'm on a Windows computer right now, and I've gone PC my whole life. Not politically correct, but you get the idea. And I think it's arguably, leaving aside the foundation, Bill and Melinda, I don't know if they've severed their relationship, but not the name, Gates Foundation efforts for public health. Leaving that aside, I think Windows and kind of the technological aspects of, which he was helping along, have done more for general global health through prosperity. And that's gonna bring you money. And when you have a lot of money, you're gonna have power. You're gonna have more. You only get to vote once in the U.S. election, but you're gonna have more influence regardless. That's the nature of things. People with money have more power. So the question is, how evil is he, and so forth. And I don't necessarily see him as evil. I think I see him as kind of bumbling, nerdy type, and trying to get validation. Everyone wants.
This is stuff I look into in the book, and there's quite a lot on the psychological aspects of it. And he comes from a powerful Democrat family that believed that philanthropic engagement was part of their destiny and part of their social status. So he was never an ordinary person. He was never from a working class background or a middle class background. He was from a very wealthy background. He had, when he was setting up Microsoft, he had a $1 million trust fund to fall back on if everything went wrong, and he talks himself about the governor coming round regularly to discuss politics at the dinner table with his mum, because his mother was.
That's not his fault per se. I mean,
I'm not saying it's fault. But I'm saying that it engenders, particularly in terms of philanthropic engagement and a complete divorce from genuine ordinary people. It engages this idea that he has the right to intervene politically in any way he pleases, which he's done.
But he did wait. I mean,
and more than most other figures. The only figure that's kind of interfered politically as consistently is Soros. And I'd say both of them have had incredibly malign effects on the world. But with the thing that distinguishes Gates is that he's right at the heart of all of the globalist agendas and policies that are most dangerous. He's right at the heart of vaccine development and this push to inject people with mRNA, which is dangerous.
Right.
He's right at the heart of things like releasing genetically engineered mosquitoes. He's right at the heart of changing people's diet because you believe that's necessary for net zero. He's right at the heart of the green agenda. There's very few of them that are engaged in all of these things at the same time, and Gates is one of them. And the way he does it is inherently anti-democratic and inherently open to corruption and danger, because he's like Dr. Frankenstein or the Sorcerer's Apprentice, the way he interferes in things, because he's got a mentality that was built as an extreme nerd in computer design, and he treats human society and human beings in the same way as an engineer adjusting a machine.
Right. Yeah, so that's an interesting point right there. Again, I think this is a leftist thing, I'm working on an article on Peter Hotez, and in the epigraph, one of Peter Hotez's articles quotes Maxim Gorky, and it's the same kind of thing where science is going to be put at the behest and usage of government, of the movement.
Yeah.
Kind of like what my relative was talking about for journalism. Everything is all part of the machine, all part of this progressive movement. We're going to progress towards this utopian, better vision, so forth. It's never something in the past. I mean, the past, who needs it? The stuff that got you here, that got your grandparents here, that gave you free speech and the Magna Carta, the Constitution, all that kind of stuff. Who needs that? We have something better in mind. Despite the fact that free market, as Milton Friedman was, I saw this clip from probably 30, 40 years ago. Milton Friedman is on the Phil Donahue show, Mr. Marlowe Thomas, and Phil Donahue is yet another pious leftist, and it's like, what about greed, and Milton Friedman's like, well, greed, who's to say what's greed? You're not greedy. We're not greedy, of course. None of us are greedy. But tell me the.
I've seen that clip. I've actually seen that clip.
Yeah, tell me the place. You don't think people in communist China and Soviet Union are greedy? You don't think they're operating under greed? Everything they do is right. I'll tell you something. It says the places there are the only times and places where people moved out of grinding poverty has been through capitalism and the free market. And this has been the best thing for people ever. And you want to talk about greed. Anyway, it's funny because I actually saw his son at there's a libertarian event in New Hampshire in June. I think his son's name is David Friedman, and he's got exactly Milton Friedman's voice, cadence, and accent. It's hilarious. Anyway, leaving that aside, what are your other works and ventures right now? I want to show people your Substack and your Twitter page because they should follow you.
Yeah, so I'm churning out pretty much an article a day on the Substack. So I'm trying to build that up. So the more people that join the Substack, the better. But yeah, so that's where a lot of my writing's going at the moment.
It's Daniel Substack, and I like I like this another Bricks in the Fall. So that's Pink Floyd. People who may not be aware of Bricks, what is it? Brazil, Russia, India, China, and
South Africa.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yeah. So and they've just had I think it was 5 or 6 nations that are going to join. It's been announced that are going to join. They've got about 40 nations that want to join. And this is something, you know, the BRICS nations and how they're developing is really something that people want to be aware of.
I agree.
Where things are going.
This has to do with whether the US remains the default currency for the world.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Yeah, so, you know, that's a recent topic. And I kind of dive into it. Anything that's to do with globalism or to do with the kind of death of free speech, the encroachment on traditional rights, the removal of democracy that we've spoken about earlier. All of this stuff is stuff that I'm constantly talking about. Yeah, so that's that's my Twitter, which I've just set up, and where I describe myself as Planet Earth's greatest living writer, overly modest, which I thought would be an amusing thing to put there. But yeah, but my Substack is Jutlandia as well, .substack.com, and the Twitter is under
a little bit
Daniel 39025.
Yeah, how'd you come up with? Was Daniel 39026 taken? I mean,
it must have been, but that was just like it comes up with these automatic ones, and I was too lazy to pick something else.
Yeah, I don't know. It's probably too late to change this. I mean, yeah. I kind of like it, but I think I might go with Daniel 39014.
Yeah, I'm happy to introduce myself that way. You know,
so I
know that I'm just a number.
I heard this story years ago. This is before the internet. I used to get this kind of newspapers, kind of news of the world, but in a funny way, comic stuff. Weird stories and truthful. Stuff. And one of them was a story. In the United States, we have a thing called vanity plates. You know what a vanity license plate is for your car.
Yeah.
So if I want to be Randy 123, and I pay the state, an extra, I don't know, $50-100 per year, whatever, I get to have that plate. So we have them all over the place. People have funny ones.
I've never got that. I've never understood the vanity plate. Oh,
it's just hilarious. It's a thing. You love your car. I mean, we have families, but what do we really love? We love our dogs and our cars. So you get to name your dog. Why can't you name your car? So you drive around. Anyway, it's an awesome thing. I like vanity plates. I don't own one. I don't need a plate for my vanity. Anyway.
Yeah, I need an estate for my vanity.
So this story from like 30x years ago or more was in the UK. They can't get vanity plates. So this guy wanted to get a vanity plate. His name is John, whatever, Smith, we'll call him. So he wanted a license plate, John Smith. And we have have all these Euro plates, BMZ 2455, whatever. So he said, fine. So he couldn't, they said, if you want to have a vanity plate like that, it's going to be 10,000 pounds in money. And so he went and investigated. He found out to change his name was only like 100 pounds.
Yeah.
So he tried to have his name legally changed to BMZ 4255, whatever his license plate was, so that he would have, at least he'd be the only one who knows that he has a vanity plate. And I don't know how that worked out, but
that seems a little extreme to me. But no, it's like to me, it's always been a thing that announces you've got more money than sense, that you've paid for
All right.
this thing. That
Well, I mean, people do tattoos. People do all kinds of things that are,
yeah.
basically vanity plates. I mean, I'm going to let you count my tattoos. I don't know if this is any indication. So it's a funny thing. Anyway, I'm going to also maybe close out with my book. I want to pop it up here. This is a book that everybody needs to have. If you want to help support my podcast, please purchase the book. It's Overturning Zika.
I've read it. I can testify it's a good read and very relevant considering everything that happened afterwards with COVID.
Well, thank you very much. And I look forward. I have got a couple other books in the offing. They're written, but I have not had the mental space. I've been working so hard on getting the message out here because I do think there's a crucial message with Zika still. Getting back to pre and post renal, in the before times, it's a very good story that I wish people had been able to digest during COVID. And I had an article published, but I couldn't get it into JAMA beforehand. I think if people understood what happened with Zika and a lot of the aggrandizements and overkill that happened with Zika, they might have had a little bit more caution about taking everything at whole cloth face value with COVID. But in the now times, in the future times, Zika is still relevant because they're working on a Zika vaccine still. And until we get rid of the premise that Zika, again, I think Zika is a real virus. It's a dengue virus. There are 4 dengues named 1, 2, 3, and 4, believe it or not. And basically, if there were dengue 5, it would be Zika. It's not really a human illness. It's more for other primates. Anyway, and microcephaly is a real issue, but it's very, very rare. But one has nothing to do with the other. That's the basic Zika story if you don't want to read the book. But it has relevance now because they're working on a Zika vaccine. No doubt it's going to be one of the extra vaccines going to be mandated and given around the world, billions of doses, add billions of dollars for tens and hundreds of people amongst our elites for no good reason. And I find this as I want people aware of it so that when it happens, there's going to be some outrage and some ability to circle the wagons against it. Anyway, so that's what I've got. I also have a book on cancer, believe it or not, that I like to have out soon. It's pretty much written, and it's kind of the not quite dummy's guide, but a way of looking at cancer a little bit differently. I think nobody sees cancer as what it is, which is a terrible illness person by person, but also a sign of basically societal success, that we don't really die from other things. And so in a way, cancer is a disease of success. And I try to talk about the organizing factors that bring about cancer. And I kind of wrote that book on a dare. And I've got a book on narcotic addiction, Withdrawal to Freedom, that I'm going to have out, hopefully both of those within the next year or so. Anyway, so that's enough about me. If you have any final words, you can get them in right now. Otherwise, we're going to call it a day.
Oh, it's been a pleasure to chat with you again, Randy.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. You're deep and thoughtful, and I always in your debt to converse with you.
I'm glad you acknowledge it.
All right, so that ends the Mutual Admiration Society.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.